This is our last in the series of briefings that we've done. And before we get started, I'm going to ask Twee just to give us a little summary of what we've been doing through these briefings. I think it might amuse you, particularly those of you who've been on several of them, just to get a little refresher as to the journey that we've been on. Twee, over to you.
Hi everyone. Well, we started our very first briefing on the 25th of March, not knowing where it was going, but we quickly realized that this was a valuable place for people to hear from David and to share their concerns about any emerging issues. So since then, this is our 32nd open online briefing, accompanied by 23 narratives, which David has written with peers, 4 personal reflections. We've had some spotlight narratives featuring issues from other sectors. We've had a number of youth reflections, including from Godfrey, who's on the call here, Surbhi, who's on the call here as well, in our collaboration with One Young World. We've had a number of illustrations from Live Illustration UK. Today we have Joshua Knowles. Thanks for joining us, Joshua. They've been providing us visual support in kind. We've had over 1,900 views of the recordings of our online briefing on our YouTube channel. And we've released 2 video clips on being COVID ready. The first video clip is about just the concept of being COVID ready, and the second one on COVID readiness regardless of resources. And we're in the process of developing our 3rd video clip about equity. And to build on this, he's not here today, but you will also, if you've been here before, Vicky, you're online. Gambian artist and peace ambassador Nazim has wrote and recorded the COVID Ready anthem and the latest song Test, Trace, Isolate and Protect, which was actually performed as part of the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health Summit, Lives in a Balance. So it's been a very, very exciting few months for us, unexpected. Some highs, some lows, but a very, very nice time for us to reflect, take a short break. We do have a survey online, so we'd love to hear from you what worked well, what you'd like us to do differently in the future, or what you loved and what you would like us to keep doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Twee. I'm very grateful to you for agreeing to do that when I hadn't warned you I was going to come to you. But when I saw that note that you prepared of what we've been up to together as this quite large family, we're not so many today, but some days we're more. I thought, let's just reflect on that, because it is a shared thing that we've been doing, and we'll go on doing it. And so what I want to do today is to repeat my core analysis of what's happening, and then I want to talk with you really just on the core issue of how on earth do we get others all over the world to get a bit more in line with the narrative that we've been developing since we started this work at the end of January, because that narrative is really important. And I'm going to obviously go into that in the next few minutes, but just to really just to accentuate what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. We just participated in the beginning of the high-level political forum in New York. This is the annual meeting that looks at how the world is progressing on the Sustainable Development Agenda. And it's quite clear that the officials and government representatives participating in that event really are of the opinion that the advances that have been made on the Sustainable Development Agenda and on the Millennium Development Goals are really threatened by COVID, and that the combination of COVID, inequity, the destruction of nature, and accelerating climate change is so painfully serious to many governments, to multiple stakeholders who participate in these kinds of meetings, and of course to the wider public. And so, not just because of COVID, but because of all the challenges that our world faces, we have to keep this work up. We have to keep connecting with each other and finding the inner resources that are necessary for being living systems leaders. And I'm not saying this just as an idle remark, I'm saying it as a heartfelt, genuine, personal feeling, but I think I'm reflecting the feeling of hundreds of millions of people all over the world who are looking for a different kind of leadership to help them to find their pathways forward, and who see COVID as a real opportunity to do that. It means that we have to keep our narrative, the language that we use, the stories that we tell, the patterns that we weave. That language has to be kept as simple in terms of accessibility as we can make it. And it also has to be coherent and consistent. And that's where I, and I think many others, can so easily get tripped up because of all the learning that we've had to be precise, and to use language carefully. And during the next period, while I take a break and reconnect with family, I'm going to reflect mostly on this issue of narrative and trying to continue to develop the language and the metaphors that will help others as they try to establish and then implement the new patterns of leadership that are so important right now. And I invite you really to stay connected and to keep thinking this through, bearing in mind that if we slip into the adversarial language of modern politics and present every issue as an either or choice, we get stuck. And that it's navigating the interstices between often quite polar opposites and finding ways to enable a collective of actors to work in synergy as they themselves advance in ways that contribute to equity and to the health of the planet. Finding these ways, finding the language, finding the idioms is my big challenge of now. I was going to start by talking about where we've been with this virus. I'm thinking back to late January, early February, watching the situation unfold in Wuhan. I remember poring over the report by Dr. Bruce Aylward and the international team that visited China, traveled to Wuhan and to other provinces, and came back on the 24th of February with what I thought then was the playbook. I probably haven't mentioned it before, but before that team went to China, I remember sitting with Dr. Tedros and Mike Ryan and others in the WHO at the end of January, beginning of February. And I remember us looking at each other and making that kind of expression that you sometimes make when you're connecting with somebody else, which is one of really substantial dread as to what's going to happen. I remember thinking, are our systems going to be able to cope with this thing if it gets as big as we think it might do? It was really having these early data that the R0 internationally was between 2.5 and 3. And the doubling time for the early outbreaks seemed to be somewhere between 2.5 and 5 days. We thought, is this going to be something that the systems that we have can actually handle? You know, the WHO will quickly become stretched. There will be a whole range of difficult issues that have to be tackled. And we kind of thought, just remembered discussing it with each other, we don't know how it's going to unfold, but we're going to have to be ready for all manner of challenges. And so it was actually, of course, a bit strange during February because the thing was very active in China, but we hadn't really seen it come strongly into the rest of the world until the sort of second half of February, when it started to appear in Iran, in northern Italy, and then in one or two other countries in Europe. And I remember then sharing with colleagues in 4SD that this might end up being 15 Wuhans before the end of the summer. And I remember also talking to a colleague in one Western European country. The colleague said to me, do you really have a view on how this is going to evolve? Are we going to eradicate this virus? Is the virus going to just die out? Is there going to be herd immunity? Or are we going to have to go on holding it back and trying to defend against it? And I remember that discussion early March, expressing the view that we'd have to go on holding it at bay because being a coronavirus, it was different from flu. And flu, you get used to the fact that actually it tends to weaken in terms of severity, and then you get these waves. And during March, we were saying, this won't come in waves, it'll come in spikes, and we will have to be ready for those spikes all the time. And early March, it was this quite long period when it seemed long at the time, when leaders of many Western European countries were saying, we're not quite sure how serious it is, we're not quite sure how to respond. And there was a period of waiting. And I remember that was quite agonizing because I kept saying to people, this is exponential, it doubles every 2.5 days now. The longer you wait, the more virus there's going to be throughout your country. The more virus there is, the harder it is to contain outbreaks. The harder it is to contain outbreaks, the more damage to your health systems, the more damage to your economies. Acting quickly and robustly as soon as you see early cases, not with a whole country lockdown, but with local outbreak suppression techniques. That is the way to act. And within 4SD, we had, by the middle of March, we'd produced a number of narratives that talked about local level solidarity with rigorous action to find people with the disease and interrupt transmission, with networks who were brought together, non-hierarchical, but with clear strategic direction, with the capacity for adaptation to local realities, consistent and clear communication, and continuous accountability, because without that, people can't shift. They do need to be able to trust their leaders, and they'll only trust their leaders with accountability. But I think some of this messaging got across. You never know when you're doing this kind of work what your impact is. Occasionally you can put sort of code words or acronyms into a document and watch them being picked up. But on this one, our whole idea during March in particular was to offer ways of thought to people and then see how they got on. And I think what we've learned during March is that where action has been integrated and local, built around the basics of public health to interrupt transmission and suppress disease outbreaks, there has been extraordinary success. I know that it's still a struggle in Singapore because they've still got the disease in their migrant worker hostels. It's still a struggle in South Korea with the nightclubs. It's still a struggle in Japan, also with nightclubs. But at least those countries have got the measure of this virus and know what they've got to do. And China certainly does. And so that's, in a way, where we've reached, as March moved into April, this interesting conundrum, looking at each other. I remember a very big international health charity, I know their operations director, and my conversation with him one weekend, early in April. Okay, he said, you know, developing countries, middle-income countries, they know what you've got to do to deal with an outbreak. They know the basics. But it's amazing, he said, Europeans and US, they just seem to have forgotten. And yeah, that's what's happened. And I suppose it is absolutely no satisfaction to find that what happens reflects prediction. It's no satisfaction at all. And in fact, as I reach the point where I want to open this up for discussion, I want to share with you three major conclusions. Number one, we really need all countries working together on this. The outbreak is advancing so fast all over the world. Impact on people's lives, on economies, on systems that are so important, like food, like employment, like systems for law and order. The impact is just growing. There's nothing to suggest this is going to slow down in the coming weeks and months. And it's such a huge challenge. We need every national leader working together on it and treating it with the attention it deserves. You've got to stop all this working separate. This decision by the United States of the 6th of July to say we're out of the World Health Organization. It's not helpful at all. It's not helpful for the people of our world. But it's happened. So now, as I sort of move into the next phase of this work, challenge one, get world leaders to give this issue the attention it deserves and get it done quick. It's no good them waking up at the end of this year and realizing that the world really has broken badly and that international relations really have fractured. Got to deal with it now. So that's my task one. My task two is to continue focusing on what I think really matters in this current situation, and that is the focus on equity. We've just been looking yesterday at the information about what's happening in meat plants. It's really hard to come to terms with the reality that our collective ability to buy cheap, good quality meat in supermarkets around the world now is entirely predicated on many thousands of people being employed in really awful conditions to cut this meat up, obviously having killed the animals, and then to pack it. And those conditions are awful by any standard. But of course, we're seeing them now because this is a place where these meat plants are places where COVID just really gets stuck in. And it's hard to get it out. But that's just one extraordinarily bad situation revealed by this virus. How many other awful situations of indignity and inequity are there in which people are working under unacceptable conditions to enable folk like me, affluent like me, to have the kind of food we want, the kind of products we want, the kind of opportunities we want. And so this revealed inequity is right at the heart now of my own thinking, and I'm questioning on so many levels whether I personally want to go on tolerating a situation where people's lives are massively endangered and they are unable, for economic and other reasons, to reduce that danger simply to enable me to have more luxuries and pleasures in my life. So this reality that it's not just the inequity is the problem, it is that I am part of the system that encourages and then tolerates that inequity. And I have to look at myself pretty hard. So, as Twee just said, our third short film is an effort to try to capture some of the conclusions that we reached during May and June about why it is that we have to focus on the inequities associated with this disease and the way it's being spread. So that was my second big area that I'm really working on. My third big area is about encouraging effective local action. See, there's no magic in this. It's just everything we've learned about COVID and so many other aspects of development reminds us that in people's lives, you don't actually see the different reflections of sectors or disciplines or departments. People's lives reflect the interconnections of systems in their own experiences, in their own locations. So by focusing what we do on local realities and by responding to people's perceptions in their local settings, by encouraging coordinated action among networked actors in local settings, by adopting the territoire approach of France and the analogues of that in Francophone and Hispanic and Lusophone communities, we have a possibility of action that can that can lead to not just good outcomes, but also to extraordinary new connections between people. As we get involved in the preparations for the Food Systems Summit that's being organized next year, we see the power of dialogue and engagement at local level and want to try to inspire and encourage more of that, and to recognize that, yes, that flies in the face of the tendencies of some to want to centralize and control in government. But we've seen on so many issues over the last few years, but particularly on this COVID, that well-organized, data-driven, integrated, local level action that involves multiple actors is immensely powerful. And so that's the third area that I really want to go on pursuing, not just with COVID, but on other major issues. And I appreciate people saying, oh, but David, there's also the global picture and you've got to focus on that as well. And I'm saying, yeah, of course. Yeah, we can't deal with climate change without global action, and it's really urgent. But at the same time, humans are not going to be able to find pathways through the current challenges, just relying on global actors. Global actors aren't able to deliver at the moment. So that's why working for local enablement and empowerment, focusing on the places where people are, I think is so important. So those were the three things. Number one, continuing to try to get world leaders to offer the kind of leadership that responds to the needs and the interests of all of humanity, which needs that leadership now more than ever, and not just for COVID, but for other existential challenges. And that is essential. Number two, unless we tackle the extraordinary inequities, inopportunities in the realization of rights and in access to various forms of benefit, we're not going to be able to deal with this problem properly. And number three, let's get better at encouraging local solidarity with coordinated networked action. Okay, so I'm now obviously wanting to have a discussion with you all, but I want to, as we move into the discussion, just sort of really convey that I'm not going to stop pursuing this agenda, and I'm not going to stop trying to connect with other people to pursue this agenda. And I know you're not going to stop connecting with other people. And that's the way we're going to have to do it, is through constant connections, without worrying about who's in charge, to just get more and more people appreciating the value system that has to underlie this way of working, and not worry about where it's going to lead to, not worry about who's going to be in charge, not worry too much about whether a political leader here or there is going to be able to deliver, but just let the feeling grow that we need to be able to have these kinds of connections working to navigate the challenges now and those still to come. Now we are just checking here time, but not too bad. I'm sitting here with Florence next door. She's picking up some of the comments that come through and giving me names, and she's reminding me about Joshua. And Joshua, welcome. At various intervals, we'd like to highlight your graphic art. Perhaps we could do that now. And Joshua, you are another of these amazing people who is able to capture things so beautifully. Which is your favorite part of this picture, Joshua, so far? Looking at where your cursor is.
Hi, David.
Hello.
It's really interesting to hear you speak so passionately about working together at a local action, regardless of global leaders. That's really coming through for me today.
Of course, I'm hoping, Joshua, that by demonstrating the capacity to work together at local level, whether it's in the city or in the rural community, in a coastal zone or in a mountainous area, that in turn will provide the stimulus to leaders to understand and reflect the importance of effective local action. And I mean, it'll be a bit of a dialectic. So I'm glad that you picked that up. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then just to, you met Twee at the beginning, everybody. Twee's a light there on the screen. Hello, Twee. And then John Atkinson is here. He was opening our last session. So thank you, John, and for your work on leadership. Magali Mahdi, Catherine Deland, Julian Delimontex, Saber Moumen, and I mentioned Florence, my brother William, who works with us and has been absolutely invaluable at the moment, is on as well. And I think we may have other members Not yet. Okay. Now, Joshua, I was reading that as well as doing live drawing for conferences, you do educational projects and activity books for children and schools. And I could see you must have fun. Great stuff. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you, Joshua, again towards the end. I hope that's all right.
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that we are joined by colleagues and friends from New Zealand, and I think Orchidea may be on. Orchidea has just had a baby. I'm so pleased that you're with us. And Joseph Baltak from Philippines is with us again. It's lovely to speak Godfrey Philemon again. My colleagues also joining from India, South Africa, United States, Europe and UK, and more. Really, really pleased that you're with us. I think Chris Lara, hello, Sihaj, thank you for giving us your comment. I think Chris Lara might be on. And
yes, hi.
You are. Chris, you asked a question last time and we didn't pick you up on it. And here you are, you're looking absolutely brilliant today. You've joined from your computer and everything. It's lovely to see you. I'd just be pleased if you could make your comment and any reflection you've got on what we're talking about.
Yes, hi everyone. Chris Lara from North Carolina. Yes, David, thank you so much. My comment last week, no, actually on Tuesday, was about how to reconcile and how to work on designing strategies to deal with one of the consequences of the pandemic, which is trust and governance.
Yeah.
I think one of the victims of this pandemic, one of the big victims and the impact that has caused on governance structures and how communities are more, I would say, as they receive messages from different messages from leaders and misleading messages, they don't trust their leaders. We see now that Bolsonaro, for instance, testing positive, and how Brazilians can deal with that, as he goes bluntly to the cameras and he says, I'm okay, and probably it's possible that it plays in his favor, because then he will say, I will be, I'm good. Everybody can continue business as usual, and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to be one of the issues that we have to tackle, even in advance, and how to deal with that.
First of all, thank you, Chris. You know, it's lovely to be connected with you again after we were working together before. And just to say that, you know, trust in governance will come when governments behave in a way that inspires trust. Obviously, it takes a bit of time, but people know when what they're being given is public relations or various other manifestations, and they will work it out. I mean, I appreciate it's going to take a bit of time, but I really am confident that trust will come back when it is deserved. And so, I mean, I'll work with you and with everybody else on what we can do to encourage it. But from my perspective, being authentic, being honest, being transparent, indicating your vulnerabilities, that is the kind of behavior that inspires trust, and it is this at the heart of the leadership that certainly I and John and others want to encourage. Come back, Chris, and give us your view.
I have a follow-up question, and it's regarding the PAHO, Pan American Health Organization. As we know, it's an organization that was created in 1902, even before the United Nations, and it's the America's regional office for WHO. But they have serious problems with funding. So, for instance, now in Colombia, they have a supply chain problem with ventilators. They bought 200 ventilators, only arrived 50, and half of them don't work.
Yeah.
So you see that the international system and the role of PAHO in this sense will be essential for helping Colombia to solve all these problems that probably is easier for a global body, but then they don't have the resources to do so. So this is, I think it's a very important point to kind of be aware of.
Thanks for stressing the really serious resource situation in the Pan American Health Organization, similarly to the World Health Organization. And gosh, I remember when I was trying to become Director General of WHO, the big issue that I was worried about was money. And each one of WHO's regions has got a cash crisis, and the headquarters has got a really bad cash crisis. So we've got to hold on to this, that unless there is adequate finance for these institutions, they're not going to be able to perform as expected. Thank you, Chris. Stay connected, and we'll move on now. I mean, I do think that it'd be good, Marianne Hazelgrave, if you could just give us your point now. And I know that I think it was Chris from TTU had a comment on it, and if you'd like to just take us with your couple of points and make them as clearly as you like, perhaps in 3 minutes, if you can, that'd be beautiful. Marianne, please.
Yeah, if I can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Because my internet is not good today. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but the first thing is, if we want leadership at the global level, where is it going to happen?
Yeah.
You talk about meat packers here. If you go to Leicester, I was not surprised that there were sweatshops there, which are fashion-led. There's a broad range of consumables, if you like, that developed countries want, and poor people pay for it.
Mm.
But the issue is, and fundamentally, where are we going to get the financing from that's necessary? We need action which is collective, but we seriously need the financing for it. And there seems to be a vacuum, and I was so glad that there are more comments, and I think it's an area we've got to look at. Thank you.
And so trying to think through, first of all, where there's the money, and secondly, trying to make sure the money is spent on the right stuff. Because I think you've pointed out repeatedly over the last few weeks, Marianne, that there are certain areas that are absolutely essential for people to realize their rights, and particularly for women and girls to realize their rights. And these are not massively expensive, but you are making the point that money is needed, that you're not able to do reproductive health without money. And you're making the point that dealing with sweatshops and other unsatisfactory working conditions also needs money. But I will say, yes, it needs money, but it also needs attention from leaders. And that's why I think that this discussion we're having on leadership linked to money is absolutely critical. I don't have an answer, but I'm going to go on working on that. That's my project number one for the next couple of or 3 weeks, is thinking about really trying to source the next generation of leaders and get them to work together. Now, thinking the unthinkable, we're going to make a comment on what Marianne's just said. Who's here from TTU?
Hi, it's Chris. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Absolutely agree with what Marianne was saying and what you've been saying, both about leadership and about finance. But what we're discovering is there are some very interesting people who are getting together and connecting on the big systems change that you and John talk about. So I just want to mention it's a nascent idea. It's quite complicated, but we all know that in COP26 and the sort of the big issues of the future of the planet and the scientists are at the fore. Well, there's another group of financiers who say, well, why is it just the scientists who are at the fore? Because, to use the old song, money makes the world go wrong. We know that capitalism is fundamentally broken. There's a market failure. So they're trying to create a coalition for an international platform, they're carefully not using the word panel, on climate finance to put to COP26 next autumn 2021 in Glasgow, as a way that governments have to create the incentives for market flows to go in a way that finances a green world. And that's, I think it's going to be complicated and very hard pounding, but I think it's an interesting idea of a different type of leadership connecting. It involves some of the big NGOs, but also some very well-known financial institutions already in it. Some of them are teetering on the edge of whether they can join. And I just think that's an example of how there are different types of leadership out there at the macro level. And just on the final point, just to say what I am doing with Nick is very much focused on narratives and change. So happy to talk offline with you, Twee and John, about that.
I think it's really important what Chris and Nick are doing in this project, Thinking the Unthinkable, or TTU. And I'm sure that we've got your access points in the chat that others can see. I've really benefited from meeting you both and interacting with you both. It gives me huge inspiration because you have got this big project on future leadership. So if you want to put any access into the chat, that would be really appreciated. Thank you for this kind of, I think, promising note about possibilities on climate finance. Really, really good. Holly Wheeler, I'd like you to just give a comment also on kind of creating the weeds that are necessary for new leadership. Would you like to, I think you're going to talk about agency.
Morning, David. Hello, everybody. I guess the thing that I was thinking about is to do with agency, and that at every level, encouraging people to take the action that they can in the space that they're in. So, I think we can get really caught up in areas that are not within our responsibility or ability to do anything about, but actually we have a lot more power individually and collectively than we might think. So connecting to other people in the same way that both Chris's just did about what they're thinking, and starting to build a network of people who might be interested to take action, and thinking about your leadership in terms of what do I do now, and who do I connect with, and what's my contribution. And you mentioned earlier people who I guess we find difficult to go towards because they don't agree with us, or they don't talk about things in the same way that we do and use the same language, and trying to come alongside them to understand where they are and what the collective understanding, ours and theirs, of what they might contribute might be. And I'm finding that at quite a local level, and wondered if you're having the same experiences or similar.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying to me and to others the importance of connecting, but particularly connecting with people you don't automatically go to. And you get surprised through these unusual connections. You said another thing which I really liked, which refers to agency. You're talking about finding your own power, standing in your own power, discovering that there's much more than you thought there was. It doesn't come just like that, like a light bulb going on, or it comes gradually, that there is a reserve, and you can then start to trust it. And that can make a huge difference. I look forward very much, Holly, to working with you on this, either directly or perhaps organising that in a seminar like this, you might have a bit of time to develop these ideas. It would be absolutely lovely. Thank you for nodding. We take that as an assent. I'm going to invite, just to tell you, Sihaj Sharma, then Surbhi Shrivastava, then Godfrey, and then Joseph Baltak to briefly make comments. So we're going to go round the world now. Sihaj is in Bangalore. Sihaj, would you like to make a couple of remarks?
Sure. So I recently read your article on yours and John's article on decentralized control strategies for containing outbreaks. So could you just elaborate a little more on actual protocols or standard operating procedures or policies to make it effective? Because the article covered those things in depth, yet it did it qualitatively. A little more quantitatively would help us visualize the system better.
So first of all, Sihaj, just to tell everybody else, you're referring to a thing that we, I think, put into the chat last time, which was a short comment piece that John Atkinson and I wrote, and that's been published in the British Medical Journal, just stressing that the command and control approach to crisis management that has been quite strongly advocated around the world is not really ideal for the local level capacitation that's necessary for dealing with an issue like this. And so we suggested shifting a bit. And I talked about we wrote in that article, about the role of incident managers in the Ebola response in West Africa, stressing that their job was much more one of bringing together all the different actors at local level and working with them to solve issues and do it in a more collaborative way rather than doing it simply by instructions from the top. What we've got is another piece coming, which I'll try and send you quickly, Sihaj, which is an effort written with two colleagues from Singapore, which talks about the elements of this kind of decentralized response, the kind of performance measures that need to be put in place to assess whether or not it's working, and even a list of metrics that can be used. But these are not simple quantified metrics. These are actually metrics based on qualitative information as well. And they're not exactly standard operating procedures, because in a way we shifted from having very rigid standard operating procedures with this local capacitation approach. But I think that the way in which we describe performance assessment in the Singapore situation may be helpful to you. So that's just an opener, and we'll do more conversation about this in the coming weeks and months, Sihaj, because this is really important and it's not going to go away. Thank you for picking this up. And if you don't get some contact from us, just don't hesitate to ping. One of the problems is we sometimes don't do things that we say we're going to do. So I've written down here that I'm going to follow up with you. Sihaj, stay connected from Bangalore. It's lovely to be getting to know you a bit through this approach, because it's now several occasions you've joined. I'm really, really grateful to you.
It's an honor for me too.
Thank you. Now,
thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Very good. Surbhi Shrivastava is a public health researcher in Mumbai. And Surbhi has been following one aspect of this, which is the human rights dimension. There's a guy called Philip Alston, who's, I think, Australian, and he used to work as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. I know of him, and I've actually spoken to him, because he did some work on Haiti that I was involved in when I was working in the UN. So I'm quite interested, Surbhi, you want to talk about Philip Alston's work. Are you there? Can you unmute? Can you talk?
Yes.
There you are.
Hi, Dr. Nabarro. Nice to be back here. And thank you for the three-step strategy that you outlined today. And I want to circle back to the equity aspect of it in reference to Philip Alston's comments.
So can you speak closer into your microphone? You're making the mistake that I often make, standing back, but get right on top of your mic, okay?
So I was talking about your second point on equity and how Philip Alston's recent commentary as his outgoing UN Special Rapporteur report was that in our fight against poverty, we have this misplaced triumphalism, which has blocked the very reforms that would have prevented a pandemic such as this, because even before the pandemic, nearly half the world lived on less than $5 a day. So I would just want to get your views on, how can we move away from this complacency as we try to achieve equity in the future?
Thank you, Surbhi. I mean, for me, you've hit on one of the really important central features of this, that our acceptance of half the world living on less than $5 is in a way the problem, because by having a small elite community tolerating not just the existence of poverty, but the continued extraction of resources that could have gone to poor people, just simply going to provide more wealth for the rich, and tolerating that. We've kind of all been complicit in a situation that you've just described and that Philip Alston identified. And it's only when our mindset can shift so that we say, no, I'm not prepared to tolerate this, that dealing with inequity becomes a feasible project to implement. You quoted Philip Alston saying, the fight against poverty with misplaced triumphalism is blocking the very reforms that could have prevented the worst impacts of the pandemic. And I think it's those three words, with misplaced triumphalism, that is so important. There is nothing to be triumphal about when it comes to fighting inequity. Thank you for making this point. I was going.
Thank you, Dr. Nabarro.
Oh no, my pleasure. I'm just diverting because I've been told that Godfrey has a microphone problem. So when, yeah, we're writing down what you've written, and we're going to give you, as we're going to quote you, Godfrey. We can see you, and it's nice of you. There you are. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you. We're just going to talk about your point and be connected with you in that way. Thank you, Surbhi. Joseph. Hello, Joseph. There you are in your place in Manila. We've got used to that tree behind you, and it's lovely. And we can imagine you must be really hot, and you're looking well. Joseph, you've got the.
Well, it's very difficult. In my case, there's an outbreak. So how do you become optimistic in the middle of all of this? So, and after hearing a lot of things from you since March, I think we're all talking about here a different lifestyle and a different mindset. Yeah. What you call, I would say, a pandemic lifestyle and a pandemic mindset. So then you go back to history and say, when did it happen last, and what can be something positive out of it? And talk about the bubonic plague and the Renaissance and the technology that came out of it. So just, am I missing something I mean, this will be the last, so I just want to make sure I tend to capture something that I want to take away. Thank you.
Joseph, you have identified the paradox, the challenge, the apparent impossible conundrum that we face, or if you don't like conundrum, the impossible situation we face. You've said that trying to seek a balance between economics and public health is something to learn, but we need to get it adopted more widely and directed to the more optimistic future. Well, okay, so there are not many of us who come on these calls, but we are working in networks to try to make this happen, and you are part of that, and we are all small. But if we can get enough and add it up together, we will be able to make the change. So don't become disconnected. We will stay connected with you, Joseph, and we will just keep working with you to find that way. I'm going to invite in a second John, who I can see not far away from you, Joseph, on my screen, if he wants to say something, but I'm trying to make sure I also get comments from others. Annie, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I just wanted to tell you what Godfrey wrote. Godfrey says, we have noted that people infected with COVID are mainly those with underlying health problems. And with this in mind, we find that non-communicable diseases are typically initiated during adolescence or young adulthood. I pause from Godfrey's remarks and just say, yeah, that is so important, that the groundwork for non-communicable diseases is laid at a very, very young age. So you're saying this conditioning for NCDs starts in early life and sets the stage for unhealthy behaviors as well as diseases later in life. So what roles can young people play in the prevention of non-communicable diseases and other risk factors for things like COVID? And what's the position of the WHO and the global community to support young people working on non-communicable disease risks? The answer, Godfrey, is the WHO is totally committed to working with young people on all aspects of non-communicable disease prevention. Diet, physical exercise, access to education opportunities, and all other essential activities to ensure that NCD risk factors are reduced. Thank you very much indeed, Godfrey. One World Ambassador from Tanzania. Thank you for just staying close. We will stay connected. Annie Feltham, just perhaps 1 minute, if you wouldn't mind, and thank you for your email the other day. Just really appreciate it. Annie.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that Philip Alston came to Britain and wrote a very critical report on poverty in this country, and the government were outraged and they just denied it. So I would just want to come back to power and political power. You know, power is it's certainly here. It's really you get into the politics and the party politics, and that's competitive at all levels. So you can sort of say, in the slightly safer world of NGOs and community action, but at some stage you're drawn into political power and power brokers.
Yes.
And I think we need to think about this quite hard because it is competitive, it is unpleasant, and it is there. And certainly at all levels. And I used to think in DFID sometimes we were quite slow to look at political power.
You're not scared. You're not scared of the reality that to make...
No, I'm not scared of it. It really irritates me, and I wonder how you shift it. And Holly and I were talking about inequality of agency a few days ago, I'm having both locally. I keep going on about this. We're going to have to work together with people we don't like. And I remember years ago you telling us off about that because we said we weren't going to work with people we don't like. So you put us right.
But tell you off about anything, Annie. I'm going to shift from you now in case you give away anything else from the past. Thank you for being with us. And we've got several people pointing out that there are really important links between COVID and food systems. Jane Badham, who works in nutrition, says we're monitoring how food insecurity is being affected by COVID in multiple ways. And on Monday is the launch of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World. It's called SOFI. That's a document produced by the UN, super important. One of the things that I'm doing is getting much more focused on food systems and how some of the fragilities in food systems are being revealed by COVID in the run-up to the Food Systems Summit that's planned for next year. So I really do want to make sure that we've got, as we progress, a very strong link between COVID, food and nutrition. John, thank you very much for being on. Here you are. John's the person with whom I wrote the article that's referred to earlier from Bangalore. And John, do you have any comment on what you've heard today, particularly the questions about leadership, the comments of Chris and so on? Over to you, John Atkinson.
Just very quickly, David, and I was going to read Godfrey's question to save you reading, but the thing that comes through from me is if you focus on the antagonism, if you focus on the difference, you're forever in a circular debate with an inequality of power. If you focus on the pragmatic and the practicality, people's positions have a potential to shift. So as we've seen in the UK with the outbreak in Leicester, suddenly things start to get surfaced when we say, where is the virus? What can you do about it? You see what you need to know. You see who's got the information and who hasn't got the information, and you see things start to move. So for me, the thing that begins to shift things in these balances is getting right down to the pragmatic. What's going on here? How do we know? What are we going to do about it? And then we get some movement. If we talk about the abstract as to how we're going to shift power, we can talk about that a long time.
Okay. And John was just writing to me yesterday that he's really been with some of his colleagues in local government in the UK, been understanding what's needed. So thank you, John. Sarah Phillips wrote a really exciting comment in the chat. I'm not going to read it out, Sarah. Because we're just at the end now, and because you've been with us in an awful lot of these, just like to give you the last word, Sarah, just as a sign-off thing before I close. 30 seconds. Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much again. Just to say, I've noticed the authoritarian thing that everyone's noticed, but I'm finding that if people take up their authority and feel empowered to do that, and in some ways coming here has empowered me to feel I can talk about things that I didn't really understand before. So I think that's enough really, is just as all encouraging people what we know and we see and we think everyone sees, to take up that authority within themselves, and they can do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And just because I can't resist it, Orchidea, you're there. How are you? How's your baby?
I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Well, yeah, in New Zealand, we're pretty good. I should say that we're quite privileged. I have exchanged a few emails with Joseph. I think having these conversations, just like Sarah has said, it has made me realize that we actually have power within ourselves, but we just need to be empowered by other people with the same kind of thoughts. COVID still exists in New Zealand. However, we have strong communities and we try to collaborate with each other. And I think that's where the power lies. Solidarity, cooperation, education, being mindful, being aware of who needs support, and sharing information with everyone else. I think when I exchanged some emails with Joseph, I sent him like 1,000 articles of what we did in New Zealand. And that's just amazing, having these conversations and getting the opportunity to meet people like you guys. I think personally, I'm gonna miss these spaces because you guys have empowered us to do something that probably we thought it wouldn't have been possible. So I just have no words. All that I can say is thank you so much, and I really, really appreciate it.
Well, that's super kind. Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Deland was next to you on my screen. She will be very pleased to hear the way in which you've described this. And she and I have been working on what's happening to Indigenous communities in North America. Florence has just written me a note. I'm going to hold it up. Can you read it? It says, "We will be back." That's a promise, okay? We will be back. We're just going to do a little bit of rethinking about how to make certain that we can offer something that is useful to you to help you as you're moving forward. But we'll also be reflecting on our work on the links between COVID and food. So as we close, I'd like to just find my daughter, Holly, if you're there.
Hi.
Are you there? Yeah, you. Just to say that's Polly, who's with her son, Isaac, who during the period of these, Isaac has moved from being a sort of baby who didn't move very much to a very confident walker, dancer, and various other things. But he doesn't know what's going to happen in his life because he's about to be joined by a younger brother. So there we go. Thank you very much. And normally he's wondering whether his cousin is on the telly, but it's not his cousin. Thank you for joining us, Polly. And with that, we will end with Joshua's picture. We'll put that in the middle, and just want to say how I'm seeing comments come in the chat, really reflecting on the team, and just my special moment to thank Florence for all she does to produce these. And then with that, we'll say bye-bye to all of you. Stay strong, and as we've said, we will be back. We'll be in touch with you. We'll find a way.